Billionaire Miles Hayes was heading back to his luxury penthouse after another exhausting day, but before he reached his car, a small voice stopped him. When he turned around, he froze. A 6-year-old boy stood on the sidewalk, lifting his foot to show sneakers ripped open, his toes sticking out through the holes. Instead of asking for money, the boy whispered, "Mister, I just need new shoes. My feet hurt." Minutes later, Miles found himself holding the boy's hand and crossing the street toward a shoe store, without knowing why. What he didn't realize was that this single decision would lead him to a future he never planned for. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more powerful. The October afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Richmond's premium footwear, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Miles Hayes stood near the display of Italian leather dress shoes, only half listening to the sales associate's enthusiastic pitch about hand-stitched craftsmanship. At 42, Miles had accumulated more shoes than any single person reasonably needed. Yet here he was again, filling another empty Saturday with another unnecessary purchase. "These just came in from Milan, Mr. Hayes," the associate was saying. "The leather is—" Miles's attention drifted to the front of the store, where a small figure had pressed his nose against the glass, staring at the children's section display. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, all knobby knees and serious brown eyes. His jacket was too thin for the autumn chill, and his sneakers, Miles squinted, were held together with what looked like duct tape. "I'll take them," Miles said absently, cutting off the associate mid-sentence. "Size 10. Excellent choice, sir. Will there be anything? Actually, give me a moment." Miles moved toward the front of the store. The boy had stepped inside now, hovering near the entrance with the uncertain posture of someone who wasn't sure they belonged. A woman who looked to be in her mid-60s stood beside him, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Her coat was clean but threadbare, her face lined with the kind of weariness that spoke of years, not just days. "May I help you?" A different sales associate approached them, his tone polite but cool. "We're just looking," the woman said quietly. "Come on, Jamal, we should go." "But Grandma, you said maybe." The boy started. "I said we'd look, baby, that's all." Miles watched the boy's face fall, watched him cast one last longing glance at a pair of simple black sneakers in the children's section. Nothing fancy, just sturdy shoes with good support. The price tag read $45. Something twisted in Miles's chest. He remembered being that boy. Different decade, different city, different color skin, but the same hunger in the eyes. The same shame of wanting something as basic as decent shoes. "Excuse me," Miles heard himself say, approaching them. "I couldn't help but notice your grandson has excellent taste. Those are great shoes." The woman stiffened, her arm tightening around Jamal's shoulders. "We're fine, thank you." "Grandma," Jamal whispered, tugging at her sleeve. Miles recognized that weariness, that pride. He'd have to tread carefully. "I'm Miles, Miles Hayes." He extended his hand. After a long moment, she shook it briefly. "Ruth Williams, this is my grandson Jamal. Nice to meet you both." Miles crouched down to Jamal's level, maintaining a respectful distance. "You know, Jamal, I'm actually here looking for some advice. I want to donate some shoes to a local youth program, but I'm not sure what kids your age actually want to wear. Those ones you were looking at, are they comfortable? Durable?" Jamal glanced up at his grandmother, uncertain. Ruth's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mister, we don't need charity," she said firmly. "I'm not offering any," Miles replied, straightening up. "I'm asking for help. I'm a businessman, Miss Williams. I'm good with numbers and investments, but I don't know the first thing about what makes a good kid's shoe. If I'm going to donate, I want to do it right. 5 minutes of your time, and I'll buy you both coffee at the shop next door. Deal?" Ruth studied him for a long moment. Miles could see her weighing options, reading him for signs of condescension or pity. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she gave a slight nod. 5 minutes. But we don't need the coffee." 20 minutes later, they sat in the small cafe next door, Ruth with a coffee she'd finally accepted, Jamal with hot chocolate and a cookie, Miles with black coffee he wasn't drinking. Jamal had explained, with endearing seriousness, exactly why the shoes he'd been looking at were the best choice. Good ankle support, non-marking soles for gym class, and they don't look babyish. "The kids at school make fun of my shoes," Jamal said matter-of-factly, dunking his cookie in his hot chocolate. Tyler Henderson said they look like clown shoes because of the tape. Jamal, Ruth said softly, pain flickering across her face. It's okay, Grandma. You said we'd get new ones soon. And we will, baby. Soon as I get my paycheck. Miles kept his expression neutral, but his mind was calculating. Ruth's coat, her worn but clean appearance, the way she'd nursed that one cup of coffee, she was working, probably more than one job, barely keeping her head above water. And Jamal, with his careful politeness and old soul eyes, was learning to go without. Well, Jamal, you've been incredibly helpful, Miles said. I think I have a much better idea of what to buy now. In fact, he reached into his wallet and pulled out 2 crisp $100 bills, sliding them across the table to Ruth. Consulting fee. For both of you. Your expertise was invaluable. Ruth's hand stopped the bills before they could reach her. Mr. Hayes, we can't accept this. It's payment for services rendered. We talked to you for 20 minutes, and saved me from making a very expensive mistake. I was about to buy the cheapest shoes I could find. You've taught me that quality matters. That's worth far more than $200. Ruth pushed the money back firmly. We don't take handouts. Miles had expected this. Pride was often the last thing people had when everything else was stripped away. He respected it, even as it frustrated him. I understand, he said, pocketing the bills. No handouts. He paused. But I do have those shoes I was planning to buy for the donation program. They're already purchased. If they don't get used, they'll just sit in a box in my office. Wrong to waste them, don't you think? Ruth's eyes met his. You haven't bought them yet. But I will, right after this. Miles stood up. Jamal, what size do you wear? Grandma, Jamal started. Hayes, Ruth stood as well. It's for the donation program, Miles said. But I need to test them first, make sure they're as good as advertised. Jamal, you'd be doing me a favor. Quality control. The flimsiest excuse Miles had ever constructed, and they all knew it. But it offered Ruth something, a framework that preserved dignity, that recast charity as exchange. Ruth looked at her grandson, at his hopeful face, at his taped-together shoes. Miles could see the war playing out behind her eyes, pride versus love, independence versus need. Size 2, she said finally, her voice tight. He wears a size 2. 15 minutes later, Jamal walked out of the store in new black sneakers, his old ones discarded in the trash at his insistence. He kept looking down at his feet, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. What do we say, Jamal? Ruth prompted. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, Jamal said, his voice solemn with the weight of the gift. You're very welcome, Jamal. Miles extended his hand, and they shook. Jamal's grip surprisingly firm for such a small hand. As they turned to leave, Miles found himself speaking again. Miss Williams, I meant what I said about the donation program. I run a foundation, or I'm starting one. I'm looking for people who understand the community, who know what families actually need. If you're ever interested in consulting work, here's my card. He held out a business card. Ruth took it slowly, reading Hayes Investment Group. Miles Hayes, CEO. I work 2 jobs already, Mr. Hayes. I don't have time for a third. Just keep it, Miles said, in case. Ruth slipped the card into her pocket, her expression unreadable. Then she took Jamal's hand, and they walked away down the street. Miles watched them go. The older woman and the young boy, her hand protective on his shoulder, his new shoes making soft squeaking sounds with each step. Miles stood there long after they disappeared around the corner, an unfamiliar feeling settling in his chest. For the first time in years, his empty Saturday didn't feel quite so empty. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. Jennifer, I need you to look into something. Youth programs in the Richmond area that provide clothing and shoes to underprivileged kids. I want a full list by Monday. As he walked back to his car, a sleek BMW that cost more than Ruth probably made in 2 years, Miles found himself thinking about Jamal's serious brown eyes, Ruth's fierce pride, and the weight of $45, such a small amount to him, an entire world to them. That night, in his penthouse apartment, overlooking the city, Miles ate dinner alone as usual. The silence pressed in around him like a physical thing. He'd grown accustomed to it over the years, this solitude. He'd built his fortune through focus and dedication, sacrificing relationships for success. No time for marriage, for children, for the messy complications of family. But tonight the silence felt different. Heavier. He found himself thinking about Thanksgiving just a few weeks away. He'd spend it alone, probably working. Maybe order in from that expensive restaurant that charged a premium for holiday service. Where would Jamal and Ruth spend it? In that small apartment he'd glimpsed through the cafe window reflection when Ruth had pointed it out to Jamal. Just 2 blocks from here, baby. Would they have turkey? Would there be enough food? Miles pushed the thought away. He'd given them shoes. He'd done his good deed. That was enough, wasn't it? He pulled out his laptop and tried to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting. Finally, around midnight he found himself searching for information about foster care systems, about the statistics on children in poverty, about the long-term effects of childhood hunger and instability. The numbers appalled him. He'd spent years analyzing financial markets, understanding risk and reward, but he'd never really looked at these numbers, never let himself see them. 1 in 5 children in America lived in poverty. 1 in 5. Miles closed his laptop and walked to the window, looking out over the glittering city lights. Somewhere out there, in a small apartment 2 blocks from a shoe store, a boy was probably sleeping in his new shoes, afraid that if he took them off they might disappear like a dream. And an old woman was probably lying awake, worrying about next month's rent, next week's groceries, and whether her pride was helping or hurting her grandson. Miles made a decision. On Monday morning he'd start that foundation for real. Not just talk about it, not just let it be another tax write-off. Actually do it. But more than that, and he knew this was irrational, knew he was setting himself up for complications, he was going to find a way to help Ruth and Jamal. Not in a way that wounded their pride, but in a way that mattered. He owed them that much. Because for the first time in 20 years, since his own foster mother had died and left him truly alone in the world, Miles Hayes had felt something when he looked at that boy in worn shoes. He'd felt connected. Like maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. Like maybe, just maybe, there was still time to build something that mattered more than money. 3 weeks passed before Miles allowed himself to return to that neighborhood. 3 weeks of telling himself he was being ridiculous, that he'd done enough, that he should let it go. 3 weeks of finding excuses to drive past that small cafe, hoping for a glimpse of a boy in black sneakers. On the Saturday before Thanksgiving, Miles finally stopped pretending he wasn't looking for them. He found them at the public library, a squat brick building tucked between a laundromat and a corner store. Through the window, he could see Jamal at a computer, his face scrunched in concentration, while Ruth sat nearby with a book open in her lap. Miles sat in his car for 10 minutes, debating. This crossed a line from kindness into something else, something that could be misconstrued as stalking or inappropriate interest. He should leave. He should absolutely leave. He got out of the car. The library smelled like old books and floor polish. Miles found them easily in the children's section. Jamal was playing what looked like an educational math game, his tongue poking out slightly as he concentrated. Ruth glanced up as Miles approached, and something flickered across her face, not quite surprise, not quite wariness, something in between. "Mr. Hayes," she said evenly. "Miss Williams." Miles held up the bag he'd brought. "I was in the neighborhood and thought Jamal might like these. Books on space exploration. I heard him mention at the cafe that he was interested in planets." It was a lie. Miles had driven 40 minutes to get here, and he'd spent 2 hours at a bookstore selecting age-appropriate books about astronomy, Mars rovers and the solar system. Ruth's eyes went to the bag, then back to his face. "You just happen to be in this neighborhood. I'm looking at properties nearby. Investment opportunities." Another lie. Miles was an investment manager for tech startups and established companies, not real estate. "Mr. Hayes," Ruth said quietly, "what do you want?" The direct question caught him off guard. Jamal had looked up now, his face brightening when he saw Miles. "Hi, Mr. Hayes, did you come to see my new shoes? I wear them every day, even Tyler said they were cool." "That's great, Jamal," Miles said, but his eyes stayed on Ruth. What did he want? That was the question, wasn't it? "Could we talk for a moment?" Privately, Ruth studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She spoke to the librarian, who clearly knew them well, and asked her to watch Jamal. Then she led Miles outside to a small bench near the entrance. "I'm going to be very clear with you, Mr. Hayes," Ruth said once they were seated. "I appreciate what you did for Jamal. Those shoes meant the world to him. But if you're here because you think we're some kind of charity case you can feel good about helping, or worse, if you have some other agenda. I don't, Miles interrupted. I mean I do want to help, but not. He stopped, frustrated with himself. I'm doing this all wrong. Doing what wrong? Miles took a breath. The truth is I don't have a good reason for being here. I can't stop thinking about you and Jamal. About that look on his face when he saw those shoes. He paused. I grew up in foster care, Miss Williams. 7 different homes between ages 4 and 18. I know what it's like to go without, to feel invisible, to watch other kids have things you'll never have. Ruth's expression softened slightly. I built a company, Miles continued. Made a lot of money, but I never did anything with it that mattered. And then I met Jamal, and I saw myself 35 years ago, and I realized I've been wasting my life on things that don't mean anything. So we're your redemption project? Ruth asked, but her tone was less sharp now. Maybe, Miles admitted. Is that so terrible? Ruth was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of teenagers skateboard past. My daughter died 3 years ago, she said finally. Pneumonia. She couldn't afford to see a doctor until it was too late. She was 32 years old. I'm sorry, Miles said quietly. Jamal's father was never in the picture. Disappeared when Jennifer got pregnant. So it's just me and Jamal now. Ruth turned to look at him. I work at a grocery store during the day and clean office buildings at night. I'm 63 years old, Mr. Hayes. I'm tired. Every single day I'm tired. Miles said nothing, sensing she needed to talk. But I love that boy more than my own life, Ruth continued. And I'm raising him right. He's polite, he's smart, he works hard in school. He doesn't complain when we eat rice and beans 4 nights a week, or when I can't afford new clothes, or when he has to wear my old reading glasses because I can't pay for an eye exam. You're doing an incredible job. Miles said. I am, Ruth agreed without false modesty. But incredible doesn't pay the rent. Incredible doesn't keep the heat on in winter. And incredible doesn't get a 6-year-old boy the things he needs. She pulled out his business card, which she'd apparently kept. You said you were starting a foundation. Were you serious about that? Yes. And you said you wanted someone who understands the community, someone who knows what families actually need. Yes. Ruth folded the card carefully and put it back in her pocket. I don't need you to save us, Mr. Hayes. But if you're serious about starting something that helps people like us, real people, not statistics, then I'll help you. As a consultant, for a fair wage. Hope sparked in Miles's chest. I'd like that. I have conditions, Ruth said firmly. 1. You don't just throw money at problems. You listen to what people actually need. 2. You treat everyone with dignity. No pity, no condescension. 3. Whatever relationship you build with Jamal, you don't disappear on him. Kids remember abandonment. It shapes them. The last condition hit Miles like a punch. He thought about the 7 foster homes, about the families who'd taken him in temporarily, about learning not to get attached because attachment meant pain. I won't disappear, Miles said. I promise. Ruth nodded slowly. Then we have a deal. But understand something, Mr. Hayes. I'm not just protecting Jamal. I'm protecting you too. That boy has a gift for loving people. If you let him love you, it'll change your life. But if you break his heart, it'll break yours too. They shook hands, and this time Ruth's grip was firm and steady. When they went back inside, Jamal was still absorbed in his math game. Miles handed him the bag of books, and the boy's face lit up like Christmas morning. Books about Mars, Jamal exclaimed, pulling them out one by one. And astronauts, and the moon. Mr. Hayes, these are so cool. I'm glad you like them, buddy. Can I call you Mr. Miles instead of Mr. Hayes? Jamal asked. Mr. Hayes sounds so serious. Miles glanced at Ruth, who gave a small nod. Sure, Jamal. Mr. Miles is fine. Thanks, Mr. Miles. Jamal was already absorbed in the first book, his finger tracing the pictures of rovers on the Martian surface. Ruth walked Miles to the door. We're here most Saturdays, she said. If you wanted to stop by again, just to check on your investment. Miles smiled. I'll do that. As he drove home, Miles felt something unfamiliar and strange in his chest. It took him until he was halfway back to his penthouse to identify it. Hope. Not hope for profit, or success, or market returns. Hope for something more fundamental. Connection. Purpose. The possibility that his life might amount to more than a series of successful transactions. That night, instead of working, Miles drafted a real business plan for a foundation. Not vague ideas but concrete goals, providing shoes and clothing for underprivileged children, funding after-school programs, helping families afford basic necessities. He'd call it second chances, because everyone deserved one. Even especially, people like him who'd forgotten what really mattered. The next Saturday, Miles returned to the library with sandwiches and chips. He found Ruth and Jamal at the same computer, Jamal working on homework, while Ruth filled out what looked like job applications. Lunch, Miles offered. Ruth looked like she might refuse, but Jamal's eyes went wide at the sight of the deli bags. "Is that turkey?" Jamal asked hopefully. "Turkey and Swiss on wheat," Miles confirmed. "And plain ham, in case someone doesn't like turkey." "I love turkey," Jamal said. Ruth sighed but smiled. "Fine, but next week we bring the lunch." "Deal." They ate in the small park across the street, sitting on the grass despite the November chill. Jamal chattered about school, about his math test where he'd gotten a 95, about how he'd read all the Mars books twice already. "Did you know that a day on Mars is almost the same as a day on Earth?" Jamal said. 24 hours and 39 minutes. "So if we lived there, we'd only have to change our clocks a little bit." "I didn't know that," Miles said, genuinely interested. "Would you want to live on Mars?" Jamal considered this seriously. "Only if Grandma could come too. And you, Mr. Miles, we could all have a house there, and look at Earth in the sky at night." Ruth's eyes met Miles's over Jamal's head, and something passed between them. An understanding, a shared recognition of the boy's generous heart. "That sounds nice, buddy," Miles said, his voice rough. After lunch, Miles asked if they had any plans for Thanksgiving. "We're having dinner at the community center," Ruth said. "They do a free meal every year. It's actually quite nice." Miles heard what she didn't say. "We can't afford our own Thanksgiving dinner. How would you both feel about spending it at my place instead?" Miles asked. "I promise I'm a decent cook, and I have this huge penthouse that's ridiculous for just one person." "Mr. Hayes," Ruth started. "Miles, please call me Miles." "Miles," Ruth corrected. "We can't impose." "It's not imposing. It's." Miles struggled for the right words. "I haven't had Thanksgiving with anyone in 15 years. I'd like to, if you're comfortable with it." Jamal was practically bouncing. "Can we, Grandma? Please, I've never seen a real penthouse before." Ruth looked at Miles searchingly. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she nodded. "All right, but we're bringing dessert." "You don't have to, we're bringing dessert," Ruth said firmly. "Dignity goes both ways, Miles." He understood. "Deal." Thanksgiving Day arrived cold and clear. Miles had spent the entire morning cooking. Turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans, stuffing, cranberry sauce. He'd gone overboard, he knew, but he wanted everything to be perfect. When Ruth and Jamal arrived, Jamal's eyes went wide at the sight of the penthouse. "Whoa," he breathed. "You can see the whole city. Pretty cool, huh?" Miles said. "It's amazing." Jamal pressed his face against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Grandma, look, you can see our building from here. That's our building, way over there." Ruth had brought a sweet potato pie she'd clearly spent her limited resources making. Miles took it carefully, honored by the gift. They ate around Miles's large dining table, which had never been used for an actual meal before, and talked. Ruth told stories about Jennifer, about the bright, kind woman she'd been. Jamal talked about wanting to be an astronaut, or maybe a scientist. Miles found himself sharing stories about foster care, about the kindness of strangers that had kept him going. After dinner, Jamal fell asleep on the couch, full of food and contentment. Ruth and Miles sat by the window, drinking coffee and looking out at the city lights. "Thank you for this," Ruth said quietly. "It's the first real Thanksgiving we've had since Jennifer died." "Thank you for coming," Miles replied. "For trusting me. I'm starting to think you might be one of the good ones," Ruth said. "But time will tell. I'll prove it," Miles promised. Ruth smiled. "I believe you'll try." When they left that night, Jamal still half asleep, clutching a leftover turkey leg, Miles had wrapped for him. Miles stood at his window and watched the city lights. For the first time in longer than he could remember, his apartment didn't feel empty. It felt like a home someone had just left, and would return to. December arrived with unexpected warmth, the kind of Indian summer that made people forget winter was coming. Miles had fallen into a routine: Saturday mornings at the library, sometimes bringing books or lunch, always staying for a few hours to talk with Ruth and help Jamal with homework. The boy had started calling him Uncle Miles 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, and the title had settled into Miles's chest like a warm stone. "Uncle Miles, can you help me with my math?" Jamal would ask. "Uncle Miles, did you know that Saturn's rings are made of ice?" "Uncle Miles, Grandma says you're coming to my school concert next week. Are you really?" Miles was. He wouldn't have missed it for anything. The concert was on a Tuesday evening in the school's cramped gymnasium. Miles sat between Ruth and a woman whose 3 children were also performing, and watched Jamal sing Jingle Bells with his first-grade class. The boy spotted Miles in the crowd, and waved so enthusiastically he nearly fell off the risers. "He's been talking about you coming all week," Ruth said quietly. "You're his favorite topic of conversation." "He's a special kid," Miles replied. "He is," Ruth agreed. "But so are you, Miles Hayes." After the concert, they went out for ice cream despite the December chill. Jamal got chocolate chip and managed to get it all over his face. Miles took a picture on his phone, the first personal photo he'd taken in years. "Can I see?" Jamal asked, and Miles showed him the screen. "I look silly," Jamal giggled. "You look perfect," Miles said, and meant it. On the way home, Jamal fell asleep in the back seat of Miles's BMW, his head resting against Ruth's shoulder. Miles drove slowly, not wanting to wake him. "He loves you, you know," Ruth said softly. "He told me yesterday that you're his best friend besides me." Miles's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His voice caught. "He's the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." "I can see that." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "Miles, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about that consulting job you offered. Is it still available? I'd like to take it. Not instead of my other jobs, not yet, but maybe a few hours a week. Help you get this foundation off the ground properly." "I'd love that," Miles said. "When can you start?" "After the holidays." "Perfect." They pulled up to Ruth's building, a worn complex with flickering exterior lights. Miles got out to help wake Jamal, but Ruth stopped him. "Let me ask you something," she said. "What are you hoping to get out of this? Out of spending time with us?" Miles considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I don't know. I just know that before I met Jamal, I was successful but completely empty, and now I have something to look forward to every week. Something that matters." "We're not a fix for your loneliness," Ruth said, but not unkindly. "I know," Miles replied. "But maybe we can be friends who help each other. You and Jamal give me purpose. I can help make your lives a little easier. It doesn't have to be complicated." Ruth nodded slowly. "As long as you remember that boy in my backseat is my whole world. If you're going to be in his life, you have to mean it." "I mean it," Miles said firmly. "I promise." Ruth woke Jamal gently. The boy's eyes fluttered open, and he smiled sleepily at Miles. "Bye, Uncle Miles," he mumbled. "Love you." The words were casual, thoughtless, the way a child might say it to any adult they trusted. But they hit Miles like a physical blow. "Love you too, buddy," Miles managed to say. He watched them go inside, Ruth's hand on Jamal's shoulder, guiding him safely home. Then he sat in his car for a long moment, his hands shaking slightly. No one had said they loved him in 23 years, not since his foster mother Rose had died when he was 19. Miles drove home in a daze, and when he got to his penthouse, he did something he'd never done before. He let himself cry, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that he'd been living half a life for so long, he'd forgotten what wholeness felt like. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of planning and preparation. Miles worked with Ruth to establish the framework for Second Chance's foundation. She proved to be brilliant at identifying real needs versus perceived ones. "People don't just need stuff," Ruth explained during one of their planning sessions at a coffee shop. "They need dignity, they need respect, they need to feel like they're contributing, not just receiving." "So how do we do that?" Miles asked, taking notes. "Employment programs, job training, child care assistance so parents can actually work. Yes, emergency supplies, food, clothes, shoes, but also pathways to independence. Miles listened and learned, revising his entire approach. What had started as a simple charity was becoming something more sophisticated, a comprehensive support system. Meanwhile, Jamal's bond with Miles continued to deepen. The boy had started drawing pictures for Miles, crayon masterpieces featuring spaceships and planets, always with 3 stick figures labeled Grandma, Jamal and Uncle Miles. Miles kept every single one, displaying them in his office. His business partners noticed the change in him. "You seem different," his CFO remarked during a board meeting. "Happier." Miles just smiled. He wasn't ready to explain Ruth and Jamal to his corporate world yet. They felt too precious, too fragile, like something that might break if exposed to too much scrutiny. The week before Christmas, Ruth called him late on a Thursday night. Miles was reviewing contracts when his phone rang, and something in her voice made his stomach drop. "Miles, I need help," Ruth said, and he could hear her breathing hard, trying to stay calm. "I don't know who else to call." "What's wrong?" "It's Jamal. He has a fever, 103, and he's having trouble breathing. I don't have insurance. The emergency room will cost." "I'm on my way," Miles interrupted. "Which hospital?" "We're not there yet. I can't afford." "Ruth, listen to me. Get Jamal to Richmond General right now. I'll meet you there. I'll handle everything." "Miles, please, trust me." There was a long pause, then okay. Miles drove faster than he should have, his mind racing through worst-case scenarios. Pneumonia, that's what had killed Jennifer. What if? He forced the thought away and pressed harder on the accelerator. He found them in the emergency room waiting area, Ruth holding Jamal wrapped in a blanket. The boy's face was flushed, his breathing labored. When he saw Miles, he reached out. "Uncle Miles," he wheezed, "it hurts to breathe." "I know, buddy, but the doctors are going to help you." Miles turned to the nurse at reception. "This child needs to be seen immediately." "Sir, there are people ahead." "I don't care. He can't breathe properly. Either see him now, or I'm calling every medical board in the state." Something in Miles' voice, perhaps the edge of barely controlled panic, made the nurse pick up the phone. Within 5 minutes, Jamal was being examined. Severe bronchitis, the doctor said, needed antibiotics and a breathing treatment. Could have become pneumonia, if left untreated another day. Miles stood in the hallway with Ruth, while Jamal received treatment, and watched her cry silently. "I almost waited too long," she whispered. "Just like Jennifer. I almost, but you didn't," Miles said firmly. "You got him help in time. He's going to be fine." "I can't afford this," Ruth said, looking at the hospital walls. "The bill will be thousands. I'll take care of it." "No, Ruth." Miles took her shoulders gently. "Let me help, please. This is what I'm here for. I can't keep taking from you. You're not taking, I'm giving. There's a difference." Miles' voice softened. "Besides, you're going to work for me starting in January. Remember, consider this an advance on your salary." Ruth gave a wet laugh. "That's the worst accounting I've ever heard. I'm an investment manager, not an accountant." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Miles." 3 hours later, Jamal was released with antibiotics and strict instructions to rest. Miles drove them home, and carried the sleeping boy up to their 3rd-floor apartment. It was his first time inside. The space was tiny, 1 bedroom, with a pull-out couch in the living room, where Ruth clearly slept. But it was immaculately clean, decorated with Jamal's artwork and a few framed photos of Jennifer. "He sleeps in the bedroom," Ruth said quietly. "I keep telling him we should switch, but he says it's not right for grandmas to sleep on couches." Miles helped Ruth tuck Jamal into bed. The boy stirred, opening his eyes briefly. "Uncle Miles stayed," he mumbled. "I stayed," Miles confirmed. "Good." Jamal's eyes closed again. Love you too, buddy." In the living room, Ruth made tea. They both knew neither of them would drink. They sat on her worn couch, exhausted. "I'm scared all the time," Ruth admitted. "Scared I can't provide enough. Scared I'll make the wrong choice. Scared I'll lose him like I lost Jennifer." "You won't," Miles said. "You can't promise that." "No," Miles agreed, "but I can promise you won't face it alone. Not anymore." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. "Miles, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Why us?" "There are thousands of families who need help.
Why have you attached yourself to me and Jamal? Miles had asked himself this question 100 times. Because when I look at Jamal, I see who I could have been if someone had believed in me. And when I look at you, I see the mother I barely remember, the one who died when I was 4, before foster care, before I learned not to trust that anyone would stay. And do you think we can fix that? Ruth asked gently. Fix that hurt? No, Miles said honestly. But maybe we can build something new, something that doesn't erase the past, but makes the future worth living. Ruth reached out and squeezed his hand. You're a good man, Miles Hayes. I'm trying to be. As Miles drove home that night, he thought about Jamal's casual love you, about Ruth's trust, about the weight of being needed by someone other than his employees and investors. It terrified him, and it was the best thing that had ever happened to him. Christmas came, and Miles spent it at Ruth's apartment. He brought gifts, practical things Ruth had mentioned needing, plus a telescope for Jamal that made the boy cry with joy. Ruth had knitted Miles a scarf in blue and gray, his favorite colors. It's perfect, Miles said, wrapping it around his neck. It's crooked, Ruth pointed out. I'm not a very good knitter. It's perfect, Miles repeated firmly. They ate ham and watched holiday movies, and when Jamal fell asleep on the couch between them, Miles felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was what he'd been missing. This warmth, this connection, this sense of belonging somewhere. As the year drew to a close, Miles reflected on how completely his life had changed in just 3 months. 3 months ago, he'd been a wealthy man, with an empty existence. Now he was, what was he now? A friend, a helper, an uncle of sorts, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something that looked like family. Miles had gotten into the habit of having dinner at Ruth and Jamal's apartment every Wednesday. Tonight, Ruth had made her famous chicken and rice, the dish Jamal insisted was the best food in the universe, and they were sitting around the small table that Miles had helped Ruth refinish last summer. It had been 14 months since that October day in the shoe store. 14 months of Saturday library visits, weekly dinners, foundation planning sessions, and slowly becoming part of each other's lives. Jamal was 7 now, in 2nd grade, and his vocabulary had expanded to include words like nebula and gravitational pull. Uncle Miles, did you know that some stars are already dead, but we can still see them? Jamal asked, his face serious, because of how long light takes to travel. That's right, Miles confirmed. Pretty amazing, isn't it? It's sad though, Jamal said thoughtfully. Like we're looking at something beautiful, but it's actually gone. Ruth and Miles exchanged glances. The boy's emotional intelligence constantly surprised them. But the light still matters, Ruth said gently. Even if the star is gone, the light it created still reaches us, still makes the night sky beautiful. Jamal considered this, then nodded. I guess that's like Mama. She's gone, but I still remember her. Ruth's eyes filled, and Miles reached over to squeeze her hand. Exactly like that, baby, Ruth said. The past year had been transformative. Ruth now worked 15 hours a week for Second Chances Foundation, helping Miles identify and support families in need. Her street-level knowledge combined with Miles's resources had created something powerful. They'd helped 38 families so far, providing everything from car repairs that enabled employment to school supplies to emergency medical care. Miles had also gotten closer to Ruth and Jamal than he'd ever imagined possible. He'd been there for Jamal's 1st grade graduation, for Ruth's 64th birthday in August, for movie nights and homework struggles and lazy Sunday mornings at the library.
People had started assuming they were family, and Miles never corrected them. So Ruth said as they cleared dishes, Jamal has his school winter concert next Thursday. Will you be there? Wouldn't miss it, Miles promised. Can we get ice cream after? Jamal asked hopefully. In December, Ruth asked. Ice cream is good any time, Grandma, Jamal protested. Fine, Ruth laughed. But don't blame me when you're shivering. Miles watched them banter, his heart full. This right here was what he'd been searching for his entire life without knowing it. After dinner, Miles walked to his car in the apartment complex parking lot. The December air was crisp, and Christmas lights twinkled from various apartments. It was late, almost 8 p.m. when his phone rang. His CFO, Marcus. At this hour, This couldn't be good. Marcus, what's wrong? Miles, I just got word from our audit team. Thompson Investment Group. They've been cooking their books. That joint venture we entered 8 months ago. The one worth $8 million, it's fraudulent. They've been running a Ponzi scheme. Miles felt the blood drain from his face. What? It gets worse. Our due diligence team missed it, which means we're potentially liable. And when this hits the news, which it will probably by tomorrow, our reputation is going to take a massive hit. Clients are going to pull out. The board is already calling for emergency meetings. Miles leaned against his car, his mind racing. $8 million. His company's reputation. Everything he'd built for 20 years. Miles, are you there? I'm here, Miles managed. Call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., and get our legal team on standby. Already done. Miles, this is bad. Really bad. I know. Miles hung up and stood in the parking lot for a long moment staring at the lit windows of Ruth's apartment 3 floors up. He could see their silhouettes. Ruth washing dishes, Jamal probably doing homework at the kitchen table. He should go back up. Tell them. But what would he say? That everything he'd built was potentially about to collapse. That he might not be able to fund the foundation anymore. That he might lose everything. No, he'd figure this out first. No need to worry them yet. Miles drove home and spent the entire night reviewing documents, making calls, trying to find a way to salvage the situation. But the more he learned, the worse it got. The next 3 weeks were a nightmare. The scandal hit the news exactly as predicted. 3 major clients pulled out immediately, taking a combined $42 million in assets with them. 2 board members resigned. The legal fees alone were staggering. And worse, much worse, Miles' partner at Thompson Investment Group had disappeared along with the actual funds. The $8 million Miles' company had invested was simply gone. Miles stopped going to Wednesday dinners. He canceled on Jamal's winter concert at the last minute. He didn't return Ruth's calls. He told himself he'd reach out once he had good news to share. Once he'd fixed this, once he wasn't a complete failure. But the good news never came. By late January, Miles' company was on the brink of collapse. He'd sunk his personal fortune into trying to save it, but it wasn't enough. He was going to lose everything. And then he'd really have nothing to offer Ruth and Jamal. Better to distance himself now, before they got too attached to someone who was about to become as much of a failure as his 4-year-old self had been. Passed from foster home to foster home because no one wanted to keep him. Miles stopped showering regularly, stopped eating. His penthouse became a disaster of takeout containers and unopened mail. He went to the office only when absolutely necessary, handling everything from home. His assistant had started leaving concerned voicemails. His business partners were worried. Even his doctor called after Miles missed a scheduled checkup. But Miles ignored them all. 6 weeks after the scandal broke, on a gray late February evening, Miles sat in his penthouse with a bottle of sleeping pills and a tumbler of bourbon. He calculated the exact amount needed. Read about how peaceful it would be. Everyone would be better off. His investors could liquidate his assets and recoup some of their losses. The foundation would close, but other charities could take its place. And Ruth and Jamal, they'd moved on already probably, found another benefactor. Or maybe they were doing fine on their own. Ruth was strong. She didn't need him. Miles opened the pill bottle. The sound of pounding on his door made him freeze. Miles Hayes, you open this door right now. Ruth's voice sharp and commanding. Miles sat motionless. How did she even get up here? The building had security. I know you're in there, Ruth continued. The doorman told me you haven't left in 3 weeks. I've been calling for 2 months. Now you open this door, or I'm calling the police for a wellness check. Miles still didn't move. Fine, I'm counting to 10. 1, 2, 3, she would do it. Miles knew her well enough to know she absolutely would. He put down the pill bottle and stumbled to the door. When he opened it, Ruth's expression shifted from anger to shock. Oh Miles, she breathed. He knew how he looked. Gaunt, unshaven, wearing the same clothes he'd had on for 4 days. His eyes were sunken, his skin sallow. You should go, Miles said, his voice rough from disuse. Not a chance. Ruth pushed past him into the apartment with Jamal right behind her. The boy's eyes went wide at the mess, at the state of Miles. Uncle Miles, Jamal's voice was small, uncertain. Are you sick? Go home, Miles repeated. I don't have anything to offer you anymore. What are you talking about? Ruth demanded. She'd spotted the pill bottle on the coffee table and her face went white. Miles, were you going to? It doesn't matter. The hell it doesn't. Ruth grabbed his arm. Jamal, honey, go wait in the hallway for a minute. But Grandma, now baby. Jamal left reluctantly, casting worried looks back at Miles. Once they were alone, Ruth steered Miles to the couch and sat him down. Then she sat beside him, took his hands and held them firmly. Tell me what happened, she said. I lost everything, Miles said dully. My company, my money, all of it. So? Miles looked at her incredulously. So I'm broke, Ruth, or I will be soon. I can't help you anymore. Can't fund the foundation. Can't be, his voice broke. Can't be what you and Jamal need. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, do you remember what I told you the night Jamal was sick, when you paid his hospital bills? You said you couldn't keep taking from me. No, I said I was scared all the time. And you know what you told me? Miles shook his head. You said I wouldn't have to face it alone. That you promised. Ruth's grip tightened on his hands. Well, now I'm making you the same promise. You don't have to face this alone. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Ruth interrupted. You think your value to us was in your money. That we only loved you because of what you could provide. Miles flinched. Didn't you? Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steel. You listened to me, Miles Hayes. When my daughter died, I lay on my floor for 3 days. I wanted to die with her. You know what stopped me? Jamal. Jamal. Ruth confirmed. A 2-year-old who needed me, who didn't care that I couldn't afford rent, or food, or anything, who just needed me to exist, to be there. She released one of his hands to touch his face gently. You think I'm here because of your money. I'm here because you showed up, because you kept showing up, because you made my grandson feel safe and loved, because you gave an old woman a reason to believe good people still existed. But I can't help you anymore, Miles said desperately. I can't help me. Ruth laughed, but it was gentle. Miles, honey, you think you've been helping me this whole time, haven't I? We've been helping each other, Ruth said firmly. Yes, you provided money, but I provided purpose. Jamal provided love. We saved each other. I'm worthless without the money, Miles whispered. No. Ruth's voice was sharp now. Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare tell me the man who taught Jamal about planets, who came to every school concert, who made me laugh again after 3 years of grief. Don't you tell me that man is worthless. Miles felt something crack inside him, and suddenly he was crying, great, gasping sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest that he'd locked away for decades. Ruth pulled him into her arms and held him while he broke apart. I don't know who I am without the money, Miles finally managed to say. Then let me tell you, Ruth said gently, you're the man Jamal calls Uncle Miles. You're my friend. You're someone who makes the world better just by being in it. That's who you are. Money or no money. I almost. Miles looked at the pill bottle. I was going to. I know. Ruth's voice was thick. But you didn't. You're still here. And as long as you're here we have everything we need. She called Jamal back in, and the boy ran to Miles and hugged him fiercely. Uncle Miles, are you okay? Jamal asked, his face pressed against Miles's chest. I am now, buddy, Miles said, and meant it. Ruth stayed that night, sleeping on Miles's couch. Jamal curled up next to her. But first Ruth made Miles shower, eat actual food, and really promise that he wouldn't hurt himself. If you're going to fall apart with us, Ruth had said. Don't do it alone. Over the next few days, Ruth helped Miles clean his apartment, respond to his messages, and start facing his financial reality. Yes, he'd lost most of his money. Yes, his company would probably have to be sold or dissolved. But he had enough left to live on, not lavishly, but comfortably. And the foundation. Ruth had ideas about that too. We start smaller, she said. Grassroots. We can't give everyone thousands anymore, but we can give dozens of people hundreds. We can coordinate donations instead of funding everything ourselves. We can organize, connect, facilitate. It won't be the same, Miles said. No, Ruth agreed. It'll be better, more sustainable, more real. Miles looked at this woman, this fierce, brilliant, compassionate woman, and felt something shift. Ruth, can I ask you something? Anything. Would you let me? Miles struggled with the words.
I never had a mother, not really, and I know this is strange, but would you? Can I? Yes, Ruth said softly, understanding immediately. Yes, you can call me Mom, if you want to. Miles felt his eyes fill. Thank you, Ruth replied, for giving me a son when I thought I'd lost my only child. That night, eating dinner at Ruth's apartment again for the first time in months, Jamal asked the question that had been on his mind. Uncle Miles, are you still rich? Ruth scolded. It's okay, Miles said. No, buddy, I'm not rich anymore. I lost most of my money. Jamal frowned, thinking hard. Does that mean you can't be my uncle anymore? Miles's heart twisted. What? No, of course not. Good, Jamal said, relieved, because Tyler Henderson said that rich people only pretend to care about poor people. But I told him you really care about us. That's true, right? That's the truest thing in the world, Miles said, his voice rough. Okay, Jamal went back to his dinner, the matter settled in the simple way of children. But as Miles looked around the tiny apartment, at Ruth smiling at him, at Jamal happily eating his chicken, at the crayon drawings on the walls that included him in their family portraits, he realized something profound. He'd spent his whole life chasing success, thinking money would fill the emptiness inside him. But it had taken losing almost everything to discover what actually mattered: connection, purpose, love. Ruth had saved his life that night in his penthouse. But more than that, she'd given him a reason to keep living it, and that was worth more than all the money in the world. Miles had slowly rebuilt his life, though it looked nothing like before. By late April, he'd sold his penthouse and moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Ruth's neighborhood, close enough to walk to their place in 10 minutes. His company had been dissolved, the assets liquidated by early March, but he'd salvaged enough to live on, and even keep a tiny version of Second Chance's foundation running. More importantly, he'd started seeing a therapist, something Ruth had insisted on after that night with the pills. You can't just pretend that didn't happen, she'd said firmly. You were in crisis, you need help processing it. Miles had resisted at first, but Dr. Patricia Morrison had turned out to be exactly what he needed. She helped him understand that his worth wasn't tied to his bank account, that his childhood abandonment issues had driven his need to prove himself through wealth, that it was okay to be vulnerable. He'd been attending therapy twice a week for 3 months now, and for the first time in his life, Miles felt like he was actually dealing with his trauma instead of burying it under success and money. It was a Saturday in May, and Miles was meeting Ruth and Jamal at the park. When he arrived, Jamal came running up to him, grinning widely. Uncle Miles, guess what? What, buddy? I got all A's on my report card, and Mrs. Anderson says I might skip to 3rd grade next year. Miles scooped him up and spun him around. That's amazing, I'm so proud of you. Ruth walked over, smiling. He's been dying to tell you all morning. They spent an hour at the playground, Miles pushing Jamal on the swings, helping him across the monkey bars, playing an elaborate game of tag that left all 3 of them breathless and laughing. At lunch, while Jamal colored on his placemat with the crayons the diner provided, Ruth turned to Miles with a serious expression. I need to talk to you about something, she said quietly. Miles felt a flutter of concern. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. But, Ruth paused. I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting to be part of our family, officially. Miles's heart started beating faster. I looked into it, Ruth continued, the adoption process. And the lawyer I spoke with said that because I'm Jamal's legal guardian, the cleanest path would be for you to become a co-guardian. It gives you legal rights to make decisions for Jamal, medical, educational, all of it. And if something ever happened to me, he'd automatically stay with you. No questions, no foster care. That's Miles's voice caught. That's exactly what I want, to protect him, to make sure he's always safe. It'll take a few months to process, Ruth said. But if you're still sure this is what you want, I've never been more sure of anything, Miles said firmly. Ruth smiled. Then let's do it. Over the next few weeks they worked with the lawyer to file the co-guardianship paperwork. Miles had to undergo background checks, home visits, interviews. It felt invasive at times, but he understood why it was necessary. They were protecting Jamal. One evening in early June, after a particularly long day of paperwork and meetings, Jamal noticed Miles looked exhausted. Uncle Miles, Jamal asked from his spot on the couch where he was reading. Are you okay? Miles sat down beside him. I'm fine, buddy, just tired. Is it because of all the stuff you're doing? The papers and the meetings? Yeah, Miles admitted, it's a lot of work. Jamal was quiet for a moment, then set down his book. Uncle Miles, can I ask you something? Anything. Why are you doing all this? The co-guardianship thing. Miles chose his words carefully. Because I love you, Jamal, and I want to make sure you're always taken care of, that you always have someone who'll be there for you no matter what. But you're already here, Jamal said, confused. You come over all the time, you help with my homework, you play with me. Isn't that enough? It's wonderful, Miles said. But this makes it official. It means that legally I'm responsible for you. I can make sure you go to the doctor when you need to, that you get into good schools, that if Grandma ever needed help I could step in. Jamal thought about this seriously. So it's like, you're promising to stay, forever? Miles felt his throat tighten. Yes, exactly like that. Good, Jamal said, and then with the directness only a 7-year-old could manage, Uncle Miles, why don't you just be my dad instead? The question hung in the air between them. Miles stared at Jamal, completely caught off guard. What do you mean, buddy? I mean you do everything a dad does. You take care of me and Grandma. You teach me stuff. You come to my school things. Tyler Henderson's dad doesn't do half the stuff you do, and Tyler still calls him dad. Miles looked over at Ruth, who had tears streaming down her face but was nodding. Jamal, Miles said carefully, being someone's dad is a really big thing. Are you sure that's what you want? I'm sure, Jamal said matter-of-factly. I asked Grandma about it last week, and she said if you wanted to be my dad, that would be okay with her. So do you want to? Miles felt like his heart might burst. More than anything in the world. Then can I call you Dad instead of Uncle Miles? Yes, Miles said, pulling Jamal into a tight hug. Yes, you can call me Dad. Okay, Dad, Jamal said, testing out the word. Then louder, Dad. Miles was crying now, holding this boy, his son, and feeling like every broken piece of his life had finally come together into something whole. I love you, son, Miles whispered. I love you too, Dad, Jamal replied. Ruth came over and wrapped her arms around both of them, and they stayed like that for a long time, 3 people who'd found each other by chance and chosen to become a family. That night, after Jamal had gone to bed, still occasionally calling out good night, Dad, with obvious delight, Ruth and Miles sat in the living room, both emotionally exhausted but happy. Thank you, Miles said, for letting me be part of this, part of your family. Thank you, Ruth replied, for loving my grandson the way you do, for becoming the father he deserves, for showing both of us that family isn't about blood, it's about showing up, day after day, and choosing to love each other. By late July, the co-guardianship was officially finalized. Miles was now Jamal's legal co-guardian, with full rights and responsibilities. His name was added to Jamal's school records, his emergency contact forms, his medical files. If Ruth became incapacitated or died, Jamal would automatically stay with Miles. No questions, no foster care, no uncertainty. To celebrate, they went out to Jamal's favorite restaurant, a burger place with an arcade attached. Jamal insisted on playing every single game, with Miles and Ruth cheering him on. This is the best day ever, Jamal declared, clutching the small stuffed bear he'd won from the claw machine. It really is, Miles agreed, looking at Ruth and Jamal, his family, and feeling more grateful than he'd ever felt in his life. The rest of the summer passed in a blur of simple happiness. They went to the zoo, the science museum, the beach. Miles taught Jamal to ride a bike, well, tried to teach him, though it mostly involved a lot of falling and laughing. Ruth's 65th birthday in August was celebrated with homemade cake and a framed photo of the 3 of them that Miles had secretly commissioned. By September, when Jamal started 3rd grade, he had indeed been advanced. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Miles worked part-time as a financial consultant, enough to keep them comfortable, but nothing like his old career. Most of his energy went into the foundation, and more importantly into being Jamal's father. The foundation had evolved too, operating out of a donated space in the community center. It was smaller but more focused. They'd helped 42 families in the past year. not through massive financial gifts, but through coordination, connection, and small amounts of strategic support. A car repair here, school supplies there, a month's rent when someone fell behind. Ruth ran the family outreach program, working directly with people who needed help. Miles handled the administrative and fundraising side, and Jamal had started volunteering too, helping to sort donations and pack care packages. When I grow up, I want to help people, Jamal had told them one evening. Like you and Grandma do. One Saturday in October, almost exactly 2 years since Miles had first walked into that shoe store, they were all at the foundation office. Jamal was organizing books for a back-to-school drive when a woman came in with her daughter. Miles recognized the desperation in her eyes immediately, the same look Ruth had worn that first day. "Can I help you?" he asked gently. "I saw your flyer," the woman said hesitantly. "About helping families. My daughter needs dental work. It's urgent, but I lost my insurance, and I can't afford." Her voice broke. The little girl, about 8 years old, was hiding behind her mother, clearly in pain. Ruth came over immediately. "Let's talk in my office," she said kindly, ushering them to a small desk in the corner. While Ruth talked with the mother, Alicia Martinez, Miles heard her say. Jamal walked over to the little girl. "Hi," he said. "I'm Jamal. That's a cool backpack. Are those dolphins?" The girl nodded shyly. "Dolphins are awesome," Jamal continued. "Did you know they sleep with only half their brain at a time, so they can keep swimming? I have a book about ocean animals if you want to see it." Miles watched his son, his kind, empathetic, brilliant son, make this scared little girl smile, and felt a surge of pride so strong it almost hurt. By the time Ruth finished talking with Alicia, she'd arranged for the dental work to be covered and connected the family with a sliding scale clinic for ongoing care. When they left, Alicia was crying with relief, and her daughter Emma was chattering excitedly about dolphins with Jamal. "Thank you," Alicia said at the door. "You have no idea what this means." "We know exactly what it means," Ruth said, squeezing her hand. "We've been there too." After they left, Jamal turned to Miles with serious eyes. "Dad, that little girl was hurting, and her mom couldn't fix it, but we helped them. That's what we're supposed to do, right?" "Right," Miles confirmed. "We help people because we remember what it's like to need help." "I like helping people," Jamal said thoughtfully. "It feels good, like we're making things better." "You are making things better," Miles said, pulling his son into a hug. Every single day, that night, as Miles tucked Jamal into bed beneath the glow-in-the-dark stars he'd put up 2 years ago, Jamal looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy. I'm glad you bought me shoes that day." Miles smiled. "Me too, son. Me too. And I'm glad you're my dad now, not just Uncle Miles." "I'm glad too," Miles said, his voice thick with emotion. "Being your dad is the best thing I've ever done." "Better than being rich?" Jamal asked. Miles didn't even have to think about it. "So much better than being rich." "Good," Jamal said, yawning. "Love you, Dad." "Love you too, son. Sweet dreams." As Miles left Jamal's room, he found Ruth in the kitchen making tea. "He really loves you," she said. "Talks about you constantly. My dad this, my dad that. The feeling is mutual," Miles said. "Ruth, I need to tell you something. These past 2 years since I met you and Jamal have been the best of my life. I was so lost before, so empty, and you both gave me purpose, gave me family. I can never repay that." "You don't need to repay it," Ruth said. "That's not how family works. We don't keep score, we just love each other and show up." "You're very wise, Mom," Miles said, the first time he'd said it out loud, though he'd thought it for months. Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "And you're a very good son." They hugged, and Miles felt the last pieces of his old life, the lonely, empty life of wealth without meaning, finally fall away completely. This was who he was now. Not Miles Hayes, CEO and millionaire, just Miles, Ruth's son, Jamal's dad. A man who'd found his purpose in loving the people who'd saved him. And that was more than enough. It was everything. The Second Chances Foundation had evolved into something neither Miles nor Ruth could have predicted when they'd started it 7 years ago. Operating out of a small office in the community center, nothing like Miles's old corporate headquarters. It had become a grassroots organization that coordinated donations, connected families with resources, and helped people in ways that money alone never could. Miles worked part-time as a financial consultant now, enough to keep them comfortable, but nothing like his old career. Most of his energy went into the foundation and more importantly into being Jamal's father. Ruth, now 69 years old, had officially retired from her grocery store job 2 years earlier. She ran the foundation's family outreach program 3 days a week and spent the rest of her time being what she called a professional grandmother. And Jamal had blossomed. At 11 years old, he was at the top of his 5th grade class, still obsessed with astronomy, and had recently joined the school's science club. More importantly, he developed a deep sense of empathy that Miles recognized as the gift of someone who understood both privilege and struggle. "Dad, we should help them," had become Jamal's frequent refrain whenever he encountered someone in need. It was a Saturday in October, and they were at the foundation office sorting through donation requests. Jamal had asked to come along, wanting to help. "This one's from a single mom with 3 kids. Ruth read from an application. "She's working 2 jobs but can't afford dental work for her daughter. The school dentist says it's urgent, infection risk." "How much?" Miles asked. $1,500. Miles winced. The foundation's budget was tight these days. They could help, but it would mean putting off other requests. "We should do it," Jamal said, looking up from the children's book donations he was organizing. "If her tooth gets infected, she could get really sick. Medical stuff is more important than other things." Miles smiled at his son's reasoning. "You're right, buddy. Medical needs come first." He turned to Ruth. "Let's approve it, and see if we can connect her with the dental school's clinic for future care. They do sliding scale fees." "Already on it," Ruth said, typing notes. They worked for another hour, reviewing applications, approving what they could, regretfully declining what they couldn't. Each no hurt, but their resources were limited. Around noon, a young woman came into the office, maybe 30 years old, thin and tired looking, holding the hand of a girl about 8. "Hi," she said hesitantly. "I'm Alicia Martinez. I submitted an application last week about my daughter Emma's dental work." Ruth's face lit up. "Miss Martinez, we were just reviewing your application. Please, sit down." Alicia sat, and Emma climbed into her lap, staring at Jamal with curious eyes. Jamal waved awkwardly. "I know this is probably not how things work," Alicia said, "but I wanted to come in person to explain why it's so important. Emma has an abscess, and the dentist says if it's not treated soon, the infection could spread. But I lost my dental insurance when I had to switch jobs, and I can't afford." Her voice broke. "I'm a good mother, I work hard, but I can't seem to get ahead, and my baby is in pain." Emma buried her face in her mother's shoulder, embarrassed by the attention. Miles saw himself in that moment, saw all the times he'd needed help as a child, and been too proud or too scared to ask. Saw Ruth when she'd first come into that shoe store, desperate, but dignified. "Miss Martinez," Miles said gently, "we're going to approve your request, all of it. The dental work will be covered." Alicia's eyes filled with tears. "Really, all of it?" "All of it," Ruth confirmed. "And we're going to connect you with a clinic that can provide ongoing dental care at reduced rates, for all your children." "I don't know what to say," Alicia whispered. Thank you so much." Jamal had been watching the exchange with intense focus. Now he slid off his chair and walked over to Emma. "Hi," he said. "I'm Jamal. I like your backpack. Is that a dolphin?" Emma peeked out from her mother's shoulder and nodded. "Dolphins are cool," Jamal continued. "Did you know they sleep with only half their brain at a time, so they can keep swimming?" Emma smiled a little. Really, I can tell you more dolphin facts if you want. I have a book about ocean animals." While the kids talked, Miles processed Alicia's paperwork and gave her the information for the dental clinic. When they left 20 minutes later, Emma was chattering excitedly about dolphins, and Alicia looked like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders.
"Thank you," she said again at the door. "You have no idea what this means. Emma's been crying herself to sleep from the pain. I felt so helpless." "We know exactly what it means," Ruth said, squeezing her hand, "and we're glad we could help. That's what we're here for." After they left, Jamal turned to Miles with serious eyes. That little girl was hurting, and her mom couldn't fix it. That must have been really scary for both of them. It was, Miles agreed. But now they'll be okay, because people helped them, just like people helped us when we needed it. Is that why we do this? Jamal asked. Help people, because we remember what it's like to need help. Miles pulled his son into a hug. Exactly, we're not paying it back. We could never repay everything people did for us. We're paying it forward, making sure the kindness continues. I like that, Jamal said. Paying it forward. It's like kindness is a chain, and we're adding links to it. That's beautiful, son, Ruth said. Maybe that should be our new motto, adding links to the chain of kindness. They closed up the office and went to lunch at their favorite diner, a weekly tradition. Over burgers and fries they talked about the foundation's future. We helped 23 families this month, Ruth said. Not bad for a small operation. 24 if you count the emergency grocery delivery on Tuesday, Miles corrected. Right, 24, and we're almost at budget for the quarter. Ruth pulled out her tablet, showing him the spreadsheet she'd created. If we're careful, we can help maybe 25 to 30 families next month. Jamal was listening intently, picking at his fries. Dad, when I grow up, can I run the foundation? Miles felt his chest tighten with pride. If that's what you want to do, absolutely. But you've got a lot of time to decide. You're only 11. I know, but I've been thinking about it a lot. I want to help people, like you and Grandma do. Jamal paused. I was thinking maybe I could be a doctor and work at the foundation. Help people with medical stuff during the week, and do foundation work on weekends. That's very ambitious, Ruth said. You'd have to work hard in school. I am working hard, Jamal said seriously. I got an A on my science test yesterday, and Mrs. Cooper says I'm one of her best students. We're very proud of you, Miles said. But remember, it's okay if you change your mind later. You don't have to decide your whole future at 11. I know, Jamal said, but helping people feels right. It feels like what I'm supposed to do. Miles exchanged glances with Ruth. This boy, this kind, thoughtful, brilliant boy, was going to change the world someday. Miles was sure of it. That evening, after Jamal had gone to bed, Miles and Ruth sat in the living room with tea, another ritual they'd developed over the years. He's special, Ruth said quietly. That boy has a gift for compassion. He learned it from you, Miles replied. From both of us, Ruth corrected. You've shown him what it means to give without expecting anything in return. To find purpose in helping others. Miles was quiet for a moment. You know, 7 years ago when I first met Jamal, I thought I was helping him, helping you both. But really you saved me, gave me a reason to live that actually mattered. We all saved each other, Ruth said gently. That's what family does. You're right, Miles acknowledged. And I'm grateful every single day for it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their tea and listening to the city sounds drifting through the window. Miles, Ruth said eventually, can I ask you something personal? Always. Do you ever regret it? Giving up your company, your wealth, all of it, for this life? Miles didn't even have to think about it. Not for a single second. I had money, Ruth. I had success. I had an empty penthouse and no one who cared if I lived or died. Now I have a son. I have you. I have work that matters. How could I possibly regret that? Some people would say you gave up everything. Some people don't understand what everything actually means, Miles replied. Everything isn't money or status or possessions. Everything is right here in this apartment, in that bedroom where Jamal is sleeping, in the work we do at the foundation. This is everything, everything that actually matters. Ruth reached over and squeezed his hand. You've become quite the philosopher. I've had good teachers. Later, as Miles got ready for bed in his own apartment 2 blocks away, he stopped to look at the photos on his wall. Jamal's school pictures from kindergarten through 5th grade. The 3 of them at the zoo, Ruth's birthday celebration, Jamal's graduation from physical therapy 4 years ago. Family. Miles reflected on how far they'd all come. 7 years ago, he'd been a lonely businessman buying shoes for a stranger's child. Now he was a father, a son to Ruth, and a partner in work that changed lives. The foundation might never be huge, they might never help thousands of people at once, but they'd helped over 500 families in 7 years. 500 families who knew that someone cared, that they weren't alone, that kindness still existed in the world. And one little girl would get her tooth fixed tomorrow and wouldn't cry herself to sleep anymore. That was worth more than all the money Miles had ever made. As he drifted off to sleep, Miles thought about Jamal's words, paying it forward, adding links to the chain of kindness. That's exactly what they were doing. And that chain would extend far beyond their lifetimes, touching people they'd never meet, creating ripples of compassion that would spread further than they could ever know. Some legacies were measured in dollars and buildings bearing your name. But the best legacy, the only one that truly mattered, was measured in lives touched, in kindness given, in love shared. Miles was building that legacy one person at a time, and he'd never been prouder of anything in his life. The courtroom was smaller than Miles had expected. He sat in the front row with Ruth and Jamal, waiting for the parole hearing to begin. 8 years had passed since the night Richard Caldwell had hit Jamal and driven away, leaving a 7-year-old boy bleeding in the street. Caldwell had been sentenced to 8 years for vehicular assault, hit and run, and DUI. He'd served 7. Today the parole board would decide his future. When the prosecutor asked whether they wanted to give victim impact statements, Jamal surprised them both by saying yes. "I need to do this," he'd said simply. Now watching his 15-year-old son sit upright in a button-down shirt and dress pants, his left leg braced for support, Miles felt a mix of pride and fear. The accident had left Jamal with a permanent limp, but also with a depth of maturity far beyond his years. "You don't have to stay," Miles whispered. "I want to," Jamal said quietly. "I need to see him." The door opened, and Richard Caldwell entered in prison clothing, hands cuffed. He looked older, thinner, worn down by regret. When his eyes landed on Jamal, no longer a small child but a tall teenager, he faltered, his face crumpling before the guard nudged him forward. The hearing moved efficiently. Caldwell's attorney spoke of rehabilitation, sobriety, AA meetings and good behavior. The prosecutor recounted the facts, the drinking, the fleeing, the nearly fatal injuries. Then it was time to speak. Ruth went first. She talked about the terror of that day, about watching her grandson fight for his life, about the injury that would follow him forever. "My grandson will never run without pain," she said steadily. "Every day he lives with the consequences of Mr. Caldwell's choices." Then the board turned to Jamal. He stood slowly, waving off Miles's instinctive move to help. He walked to the podium with that careful gait that still broke Miles's heart. "My name is Jamal Williams Hayes," he said. "I'm 15 years old. 8 years ago, when I was 7, Mr. Caldwell hit me with his car while drunk. He drove away and left me there." Caldwell sobbed quietly. "I almost died," Jamal continued. "I spent weeks in the hospital, years learning how to walk again. I was angry for a long time. I had nightmares. I was afraid to cross streets." He paused, then glanced back at Miles. "My dad taught me something important," Jamal said. "That holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts anyone else." Turning back to Caldwell, he spoke calmly. "What you did wasn't okay. It changed my life. But I also know you've spent 7 years trying to change yours." He took a breath. "I forgive you, Mr. Caldwell. Not because what you did was okay, but because I don't want to carry this anymore. And I think you deserve a chance to do better." The room was silent. "But if you get parole," Jamal added firmly, "you have a responsibility to help prevent this from happening again. To turn your mistake into something that saves lives." He looked at the parole board. "I think he should be granted parole with conditions." When Jamal returned to his seat, Miles pulled him into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. 20 minutes later, the parole board granted parole, requiring community service and continued sobriety. Afterward, Caldwell asked to speak with them. In a small conference room, he broke down completely. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was a coward. I panicked. I've hated myself every day since." Jamal listened, then said quietly, "I forgive you, but you have to forgive yourself too, and do better." "I will," Caldwell promised. As they left the courthouse, Ruth asked Jamal how he felt. "Lighter," he said. "Like I finally put something down." "That's forgiveness," Ruth said. "It frees us." A month later, Caldwell showed up at the Second Chances Foundation office, asking to volunteer. Miles was tense, but Jamal met him calmly. They started small, sorting supplies, helping with outreach. Caldwell worked tirelessly. He began speaking at high schools about drunk driving.
His honesty carried weight. Over time, an unlikely bond formed, not friendship, but respect. You gave him a chance, Miles said to Jamal one night. You taught me how, Jamal replied. On the 8th anniversary of the accident, they attended a candlelight vigil. Caldwell spoke publicly. Jamal taught me what grace looks like, he said. His forgiveness gave me a reason to live differently. Afterward, a young man approached, shaken. I was going to drive tonight, he said. I won't now. Watching this, Miles felt awe. One act of forgiveness had rippled outward, saving lives he'd never know. Do you realize what you did? Miles asked Jamal later. Jamal shook his head slowly. Your forgiveness started a chain reaction, Miles said. You changed lives. I didn't do it for him, Jamal said softly. I did it for me, but I'm glad it helped others too. Miles pulled him close. I love you. I love you too, Dad. As they drove home, Miles reflected on how far they'd come, from a shoe store to a courtroom, from tragedy to grace. Sometimes the smallest choices changed everything. Sometimes broken things healed into something stronger, and sometimes the greatest gift you could give was forgiveness. The Foundation's 10th annual gala filled the community center with warmth and laughter. It wasn't fancy, folding tables covered with white tablecloths, donated flowers as centerpieces, a potluck dinner where families they'd helped brought dishes to share. But it was authentic, and it was theirs. Miles stood at the edge of the room watching people mingle. Families they'd helped over the past decade were there, donors, volunteers, and Richard Caldwell, who'd become their most requested speaker at drunk driving prevention programs. But Miles's eyes kept finding Jamal, who was across the room talking animatedly with a group of younger kids about the scholarship program he'd helped design. At 17, Jamal was tall and confident, the limp from the accident 8 years ago barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it. He was senior class president, captain of the academic decathlon team, and had already been accepted to Stanford's pre-med program with a full scholarship. And he still planned to spend summers working at the foundation. Some dreams didn't fade. He's something special, Ruth said, appearing at Miles's elbow. She was 73 now, moving slower than she used to, her hair completely gray but still sharp as ever. He really is, Miles agreed. You did an amazing job raising him. We did, Ruth corrected gently. You've been his father for 11 years, Miles. You get credit too. The gala was going well. They just announced they'd helped over 600 families since the foundation's inception, raised $90,000 in donations this year alone, and were expanding their programs to include a partnership with the local hospital for free medical screenings. Miles was heading to the podium to make the closing remarks when he noticed Ruth sway slightly. Ruth, are you okay? Just a little dizzy, she said, but her face had gone pale. Let's get you some air. Miles guided her toward the door, catching Jamal's eye across the room. The boy immediately excused himself and hurried over. Grandma, what's wrong? Nothing, baby, just too many people, too much excitement. But as they reached the hallway, Ruth's legs buckled. Miles caught her, lowering her gently to the floor. Call 911, he told Jamal, who already had his phone out. Ruth was conscious but confused. I don't understand, I feel so strange. It's okay, Miles soothed, though his heart was pounding. Help is coming. The ambulance arrived within minutes. Miles rode with Ruth while Jamal followed in their car. At the hospital, they ran tests, CT scans, blood work, everything they could think of. 3 hours later, a doctor approached them in the waiting room. Her face was grave. Mr. Hayes, Jamal, I'm Dr. Jones. I need to talk to you about Miss Williams's results. Miles felt his stomach drop. What is it? We found a mass in her pancreas. Based on its location and the preliminary scans, we believe it's pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The world seemed to tilt. Stage 4. Are you sure? We'll need a biopsy to confirm, but I'm fairly certain. And I need to be honest with you, pancreatic cancer at this stage is very aggressive. The survival rate is low. How low? Jamal asked, his voice shaking. Dr. Jones looked at them with compassion. With treatment, possibly 6 months to a year. Without treatment, maybe 4 to 6 months. Miles felt like he couldn't breathe. Ruth, his Ruth, the woman who'd saved his life, who'd become his mother in all the ways that mattered. Can we see her? Miles managed to ask. She's awake. Room 412. They found Ruth sitting up in bed, looking small and frail in the hospital gown. When she saw their faces she knew. It's bad, isn't it?
she asked quietly. Miles sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand. They think it's pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. How long? With treatment, maybe a year, maybe less. And without treatment? Ruth. Miles started. How long without treatment? She repeated firmly. 4 to 6 months, Jamal said, his voice breaking. Ruth looked at both of them, these two men who'd become her whole world. Then we have decisions to make. Over the next several days, they met with oncologists, researched treatment options, and explored every possible path. The options were brutal: aggressive chemotherapy that might buy a few more months at the cost of constant sickness, pain, and hospital rooms. There was no cure, only the possibility of time, and even that came with a price. Miles wanted to try everything. He began looking into experimental treatments overseas, clinical trials, anything that might offer even the smallest chance. A week after the diagnosis, Ruth asked both Miles and Jamal to come to her hospital room. I need you to listen to me, she said quietly. Really listen. They sat on either side of her bed, holding her hands. I'm 73, Ruth said. I've lived a full life. I got to see my grandson grow into an incredible young man. I had 11 wonderful years with you, Miles, years I never expected. We can fight this, Miles said. There are treatments that will make me miserable and might give me a few extra months in a hospital bed. Ruth interrupted gently. I don't want that. Grandma, please, Jamal sobbed. We can't just give up. I'm not giving up, Ruth said firmly. I'm choosing how I want to live the time I have left. I don't want to spend it sick and exhausted. I want to spend it with you, at home, making memories. Miles shook his head. I can't lose you. You won't, Ruth said softly. Not really. She reminded Miles of the lesson he himself had once learned: acceptance, of choosing meaning over control, of focusing on what could still be lived, not what couldn't be saved. I'm not afraid of dying, Ruth said. I'm afraid of wasting my last months suffering when I could be loving you both instead. She told them what she wanted: to go home, to receive hospice care, to spend her remaining time cooking, talking, laughing, watching Jamal's competitions, simply being together. I'd rather have 4 good months with you than 8 months of pain, she said. Miles cried openly. Jamal buried his face in her shoulder. Finally Miles nodded. If this is what you want, we'll do it your way, on one condition, which is, I get to spoil you completely. Ruth smiled. Deal. They brought her home 3 days later. Hospice set up a bed in the living room. Ruth insisted on being where life happened. Miles took leave from work. Jamal's school arranged independent study so he could stay home more. At first life almost felt normal. Ruth had energy. They watched movies, cooked favorite meals, and talked for hours. She told stories about her daughter, her childhood, and the years before Miles and Jamal entered her life. I was so lonely, she admitted one afternoon. Then you bought my grandson shoes, and everything changed. Best $45 I ever spent, Miles said. They celebrated Jamal's academic decathlon win, streamed live so Ruth could watch. She cheered so loudly the nurse rushed in thinking something was wrong. Thanksgiving came quietly. Ruth was thinner, weaker, but insisted on supervising her famous sweet potato pie from a wheelchair. This is perfect, she said as they ate together. This is everything. By early December, Ruth slept more and spoke less. Pain medication was increased, but she still had moments of clarity. One evening, Jamal read aloud from an astronomy book while Miles held Ruth's hand. Come closer, Ruth said suddenly. She took their hands. Miles, she said, you gave me a son when I thought I'd lost my only child. You showed me what family really means. He pressed her hand to his cheek. Mom, and Jamal, she continued, you are my greatest legacy. You're going to help so many people. Every time you do, I'll be there. She made them promise to keep the foundation going, to keep helping people, to let Jamal live his own life, and to take care of each other. Satisfied, she smiled. Now tell me about Europa again, the moon with the ocean under the ice. Jamal read as her eyes slowly closed. They sat with her for hours, holding her hands. Just before midnight on December 10th, Ruth opened her eyes one last time. My boys, she whispered. Thank you for giving me a family. I love you, they both said. I'm not scared, Ruth whispered. I'm going to see my daughter now, but I'll be watching over you, always. Those were her last words. At 3:47 a.m., surrounded by love, Ruth Williams passed away peacefully. Miles and Jamal stayed with her until dawn. She was at peace, the nurse said gently, and she was loved. And that they knew was everything. The December morning was cold and gray as Miles and Jamal sat together in the funeral home, finalizing arrangements. Ruth had been clear about what she wanted: no elaborate service, no solemn rituals, just a simple gathering at the community center where the foundation lived and breathed. She wanted celebration, not mourning. She planned everything, the funeral director said, handing Miles a folder, even wrote her own obituary. Said she didn't trust you two not to make it too sentimental. Despite the weight pressing on his chest, Miles smiled. That was Ruth, practical, honest, loving without drama, until the very end. The memorial service 3 days later was exactly what she would have wanted. The community center was filled to capacity. Families helped over the years, foundation volunteers, Jamal's teachers, neighbors and people whose lives Ruth had touched quietly but deeply. Richard Caldwell stood near the back, head bowed. Miles stepped to the podium and looked at Ruth's photograph, framed in flowers. 11 years ago, he began, steady despite the grief. I was a wealthy man who had forgotten what it meant to be human. I walked into a shoe store, and saw a boy looking at shoes he couldn't afford. That moment changed my life. He told the story: the boy, the grandmother, the accident, the recovery, the foundation, the slow and deliberate building of a family by choice. Ruth taught me that the greatest gift we can give isn't money, Miles said, it's presence, showing up, choosing love even when it's hard. He looked at Jamal in the front row. She taught my son forgiveness. She taught me acceptance. She taught us that family is something you build. From his pocket, Miles unfolded a piece of paper, Ruth's handwriting. People don't just need help, he read. They need dignity. They need to feel respected, not pitied. That principle, he announced, would continue to guide the foundation. A new scholarship program in Ruth's name would support grandparents raising grandchildren, and the community center itself would be renamed Ruth's House. A place, Miles said, voice breaking, where everyone is family. After the service, people lined up to share memories, stories of housing found, scholarships earned, hope restored. Richard Caldwell approached quietly. She gave me a second chance, he said. She saw who I could become. She always did, Miles replied. She saw potential. That night, back in the apartment that still carried the faint scent of lavender, Miles and Jamal sat in silence. What do we do now? Jamal asked. We live, Miles said. The way she taught us. College loomed. Stanford. Medicine. She'd want you to go, Miles said gently. She made me promise. But you'll be alone. Miles paused. He had known loneliness before. This was different. This was loss shaped by love. I'll be okay, he said. I have you. I have the foundation. I have 11 years with the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. I'm going to miss her so much, Jamal whispered. Me too, son. The months that followed were heavy but purposeful. Ruth's house opened its doors wider. Job training, counseling, weekly gatherings. It became a living place of hope. Jamal volunteered whenever he could, working with younger kids the way Ruth once had. In May, the first Ruth Williams Memorial Scholarships were awarded, 5 students raised by grandparents, each story echoing Jamal's own. This is her legacy, Miles realized, living, growing. By August, they packed Jamal's things for Stanford: clothes, books, the telescope. She should be here, Miles said quietly. She is, Jamal replied. In all of this, they drove west together, grieving and remembering mile by mile. At night, they looked at old photos, Thanksgivings, graduations, ribbon cuttings. Do you think she can see us? Jamal asked one night. I think everything we do carries her imprint, Miles said. At Stanford, they hugged goodbye, tears, pride, promises. Driving home alone, Miles stopped at a diner somewhere in Nevada, surrounded by strangers. For the first time in 11 years he was alone, but not empty. This was the ache left by love. Back home, he walked through the apartment, touching Ruth's things. On the refrigerator, a note waited. She told him not to mourn what had been given. She reminded him that love stayed in every family, helped, every life changed. That's not loneliness, she wrote. That's legacy. Miles folded the note and placed it in his wallet. He wasn't alone. He had a son who called every Sunday.
A foundation helping families, a community center filled with hope and memories that would sustain him. 11 years, $45, one pair of shoes. That was all it had taken to change everything. And Ruth's gift, love, dignity, compassion, would never stop giving. 1 year after Ruth's death, the second annual Ruth Williams Memorial Gala filled the community center to capacity. Ruth's house glowed warmly that evening, packed with people whose lives had been changed by the foundation. More than 800 individuals had been helped that year alone. 15 scholarships awarded, hundreds of families connected to housing, healthcare, and opportunity. Jamal came home from Stanford for the event, just as he always did. He was thriving, straight A's, early medical research, a future unfolding exactly as Ruth had dreamed for him. Every break, every summer, he returned to Ruth's house, keeping the promise he'd made years ago. Miles stood at the podium with Jamal beside him. 12 years ago, Miles said, his voice steady, I walked into a shoe store and made a choice that changed my life. I bought shoes for a boy I didn't know. That boy is standing next to me now, finishing his first year of pre-med at Stanford. He turned to Jamal. Would you like to say a few words? Jamal stepped forward. At 18 he was tall now, confident, far removed from the 6-year-old with worn shoes. Yet his eyes still carried the same kindness. My grandmother Ruth used to say we're all just adding links to a chain of kindness, Jamal said. Someone helps us, and we pass it on. It keeps growing, reaching people we'll never even meet. He held up a photo, Miles, Ruth and Jamal at Thanksgiving years earlier, all laughing. This was my family, Jamal continued. Not by blood, but by choice. My dad chose to help a stranger. My grandmother chose to trust him. Together they built something that would outlast all of us. His voice strengthened. Grandma died a year ago, but her chain of kindness didn't end. Every family helped adds another link. Every act of compassion keeps it going. Every time we choose love over indifference, we honor her. He looked at Miles. My dad taught me that real wealth isn't money. It's the lives you touch, the love you give, the difference you make. By that measure, we are the richest people in the world. The room erupted in applause. Miles pulled Jamal into a hug, both of them crying, both of them smiling. After the gala, they drove to the cemetery, as they always did after major foundation events. Miles placed lavender, Ruth's favorite, on the grave. We helped 800 people this year, Mom, he said softly. The scholarship fund is secure. Ruth's house is expanding to include a medical clinic, and Jamal's on track to graduate summa cum laude. I got an A in organic chemistry, Jamal added. I thought about you during every exam. They stood in silence, the December wind sharp but bearable. Do you ever regret it? Jamal asked. Giving up everything for us. Miles thought about the penthouse, the company, the millions, and the emptiness that had once filled his life. Not for a single second, he said. I didn't give up anything that mattered. I gained everything that does. What do you think she'd say if she could see us? Miles smiled. She'd tell us to stop standing in the cold and go get hot chocolate. Then she'd say she's proud. And then she'd give us a list of 3 more families who need help. Jamal laughed. That sounds exactly like her. As they walked back to the car, Jamal wrapped an arm around Miles's shoulders. Thanks, Dad. For what? For seeing me that day, for not walking away, for becoming my father, for loving Grandma. Miles stopped and faced him. Thank you for letting me be your dad, for teaching me what family really means. They stood there, father and son, bound not by blood but by choice, love, and the memory of an extraordinary woman. Driving home past Ruth's house, past the park and library that held so many memories, Miles felt something he'd spent most of his life searching for. Peace, not because the grief was gone, it never would be, but because he knew their lives had mattered. That Ruth's love had created ripples that would last generations. Dad, Jamal said quietly, as they parked, when I finish medical school, I want to come back. Open a practice that works with the foundation. Make sure the families we help get real health care. Miles felt tears rise. Ruth would love that. I know, Jamal said. That's why I want to do it. Inside the apartment, Miles made hot chocolate the way Ruth had taught him. Extra marshmallows, a pinch of cinnamon. They sat at the kitchen table, talking about school, the foundation, the future. For the first time since Ruth's death, the apartment didn't feel empty. It felt full of purpose, of love, of possibility, because the greatest gift wasn't the life you lived, it was the life you made possible for others, and by that measure, Ruth Williams's gift would never stop giving.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.